Good morning. I'm Katie Dutcher from Flourish and Bloom and Monterey Bay Meditation Studio. So today's meditation is, as I wrote in the description, it's about one of those kind of feelings that you maybe wish you never had to deal with. Um, Annoyance. Maybe it goes as far as anger. Maybe there's something that seems petty, like it shouldn't, there's that word, shouldn't bother you, but for some reason it does. And so again, part of the reason that these kind of emotions are difficult is because on top of the pain or the difficulty of actually having and dealing with the emotion, on top of it, it's that we feel like maybe we're bad for having it. And so that really gets confusing or challenging to be dealing with, um, like calling into question, am I good? Am I bad? Am I okay? On top of dealing with whatever situation this is. Another thing that makes this difficult is, and it's not just with this emotion, but it's this kind of circling through the mind. We've all had this experience where the mind kind of takes something and just loops through. It's this happened. Why did that happen? It shouldn't have happened. Here's why. Here's what I would say if I could tell that person. Da 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 da. Um, and then and then it just kind of loops through, maybe with some variation or maybe just the same thing. And so that can be something that's difficult too. It's this rumination, this kind of thing where we actually get tired of our own thoughts, but not always tired enough to drop the story. And so that's what we're meditating on today. And let's not expect that this would be solved after a meditation. It can be really helpful though for just noticing what's going on. And I've titled this Letting Be and Letting Go. And so I think it's both of these things. I think part of it is just letting it be, that's what I happen to be experiencing right now, is annoyance or anger. Um, and then also letting it go to whatever extent possible. Just, eventually, or maybe it's a repeated thing when we notice that cycle ramping up, to let it go. So it's both of those things, balancing. This is here, that's the way it is. And when I have some space around it, letting it move through, letting it go. So go ahead and get comfortable for a meditation. And we'll begin, as we always do, by letting ourselves settle in, inviting ourselves to settle in. In a situation where these feelings are arising, perhaps we're feeling very unsettled. Something has happened or keeps happening that really has us feeling uncomfortable. Something we prefer would not happen or not in this way. And so there's There's perhaps some unsettledness, some flutteriness. Noticing if that's here. Noticing where that can be felt. Maybe the heart is beating quickly. Maybe the breath is moving more rapidly or shallowly. Maybe it's a feeling in your stomach, this fluttery discomfort. Maybe it's something else, something in the muscles. If there is this sensation, just beginning to locate where it is, where can you sense it? What is it like? And at the same time, perhaps you can feel, if you direct your attention, you can feel that you are somehow grounded physically. You're sitting or you're lying down. The body has found a place that's relatively comfortable and balanced for now. Seeing if it's possible to feel this too, that the body is resting against something, against the ground, against a couch, a chair. Perhaps, if it's helpful, reminding yourself that the earth is underneath you. There is a whole planet, almost unimaginably large, underneath you. Perhaps you can sense this groundedness, this being supported, and perhaps you can sense some feeling indicating upset or ungroundedness. Maybe it's possible for both of these things to exist. Feeling your breath. It might be moving quickly or slowly. Just letting yourself feel it as it is. The lifting through the body, the release. If it's helpful, you might actually intentionally slow the breath, taking a few deeper, slower breaths. A kind of a reset. And perhaps this is the meditation for you to simply notice your breath, that in spite of or along with any feeling that is happening, any story that's going on, you're breathing. And perhaps the mind is active, stirred up. Perhaps you notice yourself going back to this story. You've already rehearsed it before, but here it is again. The story of should and should not, this person or this thing happening that is uncomfortable, that's disruptive, inconvenient. There are emotions along with this. Anger or annoyance, or maybe if we get more specific, feeling of, or at least this story of being disrespected or unacknowledged in some way. Maybe it's a story of, I know best, this person doesn't. So this time as the story comes through, beginning to let yourself really clue into it. This doesn't mean being sucked in by it. That's already happened. But with this sense of grounding, perhaps we can begin to just maybe ask a few clarifying questions. I'll name a few and perhaps one of them will seem like a good starting place for you. So one question might be, what is the story that I'm telling or that I'm believing right now? It all seems like fact, and yet somewhere there's a story. There might be a story about that other person's intentions or expectations. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Maybe we don't have any way of knowing. There might be a story about myself. Maybe I'm believing that I'm very separate from that other person, that I don't ever do things like that. Beginning to excavate, to uncover some of these beliefs, some of these stories that have been passing through and just accepted or under the surface. And as you uncover them, sometimes they can't seem to bear the light of day. If I uncover the story that I'm better than, or that I don't ever do things like that, something begins to feel shaky about that. Maybe there are cracks showing up in that story. I'm telling a story that begins with, this person is doing this because they think. How do I know what someone else thinks? do I know? Beginning to notice these stories. And again, it really isn't about disagreeing or proving wrong, but it's again, here's the letting be of just noticing, actually acknowledging the underlying thoughts going on. And when we acknowledge them, sometimes they hold a little less power. We get a little detachment or objectivity that we didn't have before. It doesn't mean we're bad or stupid for having these thoughts, for telling these stories. Everyone does this at times. We get stuck. And how wonderful to have some tools for little by little getting unstuck. Another question you might ask is, what is the effect of this story? When I tell this story, what's the effect? Does it help in some way? Does it hurt in some way? Does it cause separation or connection? So again, we're not necessarily trying to change anything, but we're just cluing in very closely to our experience. You might come back to this experience of what it feels like in the body to be working with this. The thoughts, the stories, the emotions. When we come to the emotions, we might again just invite some tenderness with ourselves. Again, no need to bring in good or bad. It's an uncomfortable feeling, this sticky kind of annoyance or scorn, whatever it is. It doesn't feel good. So perhaps just kindness with yourself. This sense of, ouch, I'm struggling right now. We might, if we're ready, begin to ask some other questions. Questions with real curiosity. instead of this question of kind of like, what is he thinking? Actually asking yourself that question, wow, wonder what he's thinking that has this seem like a reasonable situation for him. Actually being curious about this. Perhaps the question of, even though we seem so different right now, how are we alike? Perhaps we are alike in the sense that we care very much about having our own way. We care very much about doing the right thing. We may have very different ideas about how that takes place, but perhaps the intent is the same. Or perhaps one thing that comes out of this is a not knowing, just a simple I'm not understanding. I'm being with this sense of there's perhaps something here that I don't know, that I can't figure my way through. That in itself can be a real source of discomfort. But it can also be a wonderful starting point for more curiosity. What is occurring here? With these questions, with these ways of working with a situation, it can feel perhaps as if we're beginning to untangle a big lump of yarn. Imagine it all tangled up tightly, and we're beginning to sort of pull it apart a little bit. Maybe we don't feel like we're any closer to having it all straightened out, but more spaces between the tangles. Beginning to simply open it up, to let a little more space, a little more light in. And all the time, whenever we can, working with a sense of compassion. Each person is doing their best, probably. That person, even if we can't understand it, that's the best they can do. If they could do something different, they would. I'm doing my best too. Here I am sitting with this. I'm really doing my best to be with it, to be with myself. Holding this all with kindness. Breathing in and breathing out. Though you may have traveled miles away or back in time in your thoughts and the stories, you're still right here. Body, mind, and heart right here in this moment. It's okay if this does not feel solved in this moment. Perhaps sometimes just the simple reminder, things are as they are. Things are as they are. I am as I am. Just an acceptance of this is what is occurring right now, and it is as it is. In a moment, I'll ring the bell. So, this might be the kind of thing that you would return to again and again. I normally have a kind of a certain length of meditations, and so I brought it to a close, and yet it doesn't mean that that's the end of it. That if it's something that really has a kind of a hold on you, then it can take some time to kind of loosen up a little bit. And it's not about rushing it, but it's just about learning more about yourself and and staying open as you work with it. As you could probably maybe sense from some of these questions that, when those feelings of curiosity arise, when it begins to be actual curiosity of, I wonder what this other person is thinking in their mind, because they have a different mindset than I do about this. um, or I wonder what we have similar and what we have that's different. Then sometimes we can maybe think that might be a good point to actually communicate, to talk to the other person. When some of the kind of anger and resistance has dissipated, and we're left with this curiosity of what exactly is happening here, then it might be a good time to actually talk about that, to ask and to listen. And so I'm really wishing you well with all of this when these things arise, or if they're arising now, and you're not alone in this. I'll see you next week.